a hard-boiled crime writer. I have 5 in the D.I. Sterling series. Starts with Retriever of Souls, then Children in Chains, and then the third one, Injections of Insanity, Rage and Retribution, and the one that came out this year, Love Me Tender. They are, as I said, they're hard-boiled crime. Each book, as usual, is a standalone crime, but the main characters continue through that. Apart from being a crime writer, I have been a creative writing tutor for very nearly 20 years. I run my own critique and author mentoring service. I have just recently stepped down as head judge for Writers Forum monthly fiction competitions, and I used to write 2 columns for that magazine as well, which I've stopped doing so that I can concentrate on my own writing. I've just recently been contracted by Headline to write 2 standalone psychological thrillers, one of which I've written, and the other one I am currently climbing out of a pothole. I hope.
Nice. So we've got quite a few questions, like before we went live, mostly from our author members.
Okay.
So Abby Frost had a really good one, I think. She said your books contain some really gritty material. How do you feel about trigger warnings on novels that show the darkest side of crime?
I'm in 2 minds about this. I can understand that there are certain things that would be emotional triggers for some people. Personally, I'm not in favour of putting trigger warnings on books. I think the blurb on the back generally tells you what the book is about. For example, Children in Chains is about people trafficking and child abduction for the purpose of putting these children into the sex trade. But it does say on the back what the book is about, and in the blurb. So anybody who is going to be sensitive with regards to crimes with children, the blurb does tell you. The thing is, there are so many things that could be a trigger. You can't cover everything. So overall, no, I'm not in favour of it, but I do feel that if there is sensitive material in the book, that should be clear in the blurb.
I'm trying to think. There's a whole bunch of like the Canelo authors who've asked you questions. So Martin Lee, who writes as MJ Lee, he's asked what you enjoy most writing a novel or researching it.
I most enjoy research because I can spend hours going into something. Very often I go off at a tangent. I'll see a thread that is almost to do with what it is I'm supposed to be looking at, and then 2 hours will have whizzed by and I haven't actually done anything constructive. But the main reason I prefer research is because I actually really don't like writing. I don't like, I know, I'm a writer. I don't like the physical act of writing. I have everything in my head. I have dialogue that will drive me insane. And then I will sit down to write, and the actual writing is tedious. I love editing. Once I've got the first draft done, I absolutely love editing. But if it's a straight toss-up between writing and research, research wins.
Fair enough. He also wanted to know how you came up with your plots.
I have an evil mind. That's it. I have an evil mind. The plot comes to me. I have no idea where from. From where. I will literally be walking along somewhere and an entire plot comes into my head. The bare bones of it, obviously. And then when I start thinking about it, I start adding to it, taking away, making a few more twists, and so on. But yeah, I never have to think up ideas. They just come to me.
You're not inspired by like news articles or anything then?
No. And the funny thing is, the book that I was just talking about, Children in Chains, that came out the same year as, oh God, what was his name? I can't think of the person's name, but was the lead singer, I think, from the Lost Prophets. And my sister read my book and she said, how did you know about that? And I said, well, I didn't. And she said, yes, you must have done because it's in your book. And I said, but that book was written 3 years before it was published. The fact that it was published at the same time as that particular scandal hit the news, pure coincidence. And she would not believe me. She was convinced that I had insider knowledge.
Wow. Jane Risdon says she agrees the physical act of writing is pain.
It is. It's tedious. It's great to, for me, the best 2 words in the English language, the end. And I make a point of actually typing it, the end, because it's, I think particularly when we're in the middle of or for me anyway, when I'm in the middle of a novel, I always start off with masses of enthusiasm and it goes, wee. And once I get over the middle part, I race towards the end. But that middle section where I know there is still so much to do, so many plot twists to put in, so much to work out and make sure that everything goes right. And it's like, I've still got about 40,000 words to do. And it feels like climbing a mountain. I don't like writing. I love inventing. I don't like writing. And I bet I'm not the, well, Jane Risdon just said the same thing. And I bet you we are far from the only ones.
Yeah, I would imagine. Sheila Bugler had a few questions for you as well. She said she hopes to make this because she's a huge fan of your writing.
Thank you, Sheila.
And she wants to know how you plot your novels. Are you a planner or a pantser?
I am a plotster. A pantser. I plot, but only to a certain extent. And very often, a third of the way into the book, a character will appear that is going to totally change everything that I had in mind. So I always know exactly what the crime is. I know who has committed it. I know why, and I know how the book will end. But what happens in the middle, or between the beginning and the end, it can change drastically. Every one of my books has characters that I didn't know existed when I started out. And I know that some people plot into, everything is itemized and plotted, and I can't work that way. I do have a plan, but it tends to get a bit pantstered.
I think Sheila would be down with that because I think she completely pants it.
I believe so. But she writes great books, so whatever it is she's doing it right.
I know. I've asked her this because it's always people who come out and say that they completely make it up that I can never believe do, because the books are like always really intricate, and you're like, how have you managed that without a plan?
The characters arrive and once they've arrived, you've then got to deal with them, and that changes everything. And very often it changes what's gone before, which is why I love editing, because in the editing process, I sort out what's been missed in that early part. It's like all of my books have a number of red herrings. I know at the beginning that I'm going to have like 2 or 3, and I know everything about them, and I know why they're in the book and how I'm going to make them look guilty, even if they're not. And then right out of the blue, Joe Bloggs will drop in and say, hey, what about me? I could have done it. And then I have to actually work that person into the plot. Possibly was already there in my mind all along, but waiting his turn. I don't know.
So Jane says the end she finds satisfying, hoping the end as well.
Absolutely. It's the best. Best 2 words in the English language.
Leslie Lloyd said hello to both of us.
Hello.
I wanted to ask you about the red herrings. So as someone, if people are watching this who are about to start writing, or are sort of just at the beginning of the journey, how do you go about doing that? How do you go about hiding the red herrings in such a way that they're not like obvious?
Okay. For me, every red herring has to look guilty. They have to have motive to a greater or lesser degree. They have to be in the right place at the wrong time for them, so that they have opportunity, or possibly have opportunity. But what I do with mine, I make sure they are guilty of something. They may not be guilty of the actual crime, the main crime in the book, but they will all have something that they are trying to hide for a particular reason. It could be an extramarital affair. It could be that they're embezzling their company. It could be that they are guilty of a different crime. But I make sure that they have, the detective has the reason to look at each of them, and the reader. Because what I love is when readers come back to me and say, all through your book, I knew who it was, and then it wasn't. And then I knew who it was, and then it wasn't. And then I knew who it was, and then it wasn't. And right at the end, I found out who it was, and that person wasn't even on my radar. But if you read the book the second time, that person's there all the way through, at the right time, for the right reasons, because they were committing the crime.
Right.
Does that answer the question?
It does. It's a good answer to the question. Jane said she cannot plot. It's in her head. The characters appear, similar to you.
Mm-hmm. That's exactly what happens.
Daniel McBreakneck says hi.
Hi.
And I'm going to go back and read you some more of Sheila's questions, because she had some really good ones. She said, what single piece of advice would you give to aspiring crime writers, as I know we have many in this group?
Oh, one single piece of advice.
You can go for 2 if you want, if it's for you.
No, I'm just trying to think. When I was starting out, obviously, this is an obvious thing. Try not to copy your favourite authors. There are certain tropes within crime writing that we all have to use because they're crime novels. But try to make your main character different in some way, or the crime is different. Read a lot of crime, as wide as you possibly can. Read everything from old crime authors such as Agatha Christie, and whimsical crime authors right the way through to the darkest, and see how the novels are plotted, how the red herrings are put in. Just, I suppose, learn. Take it as an apprenticeship. Read.
Do you read crime books similar to the kind that you write while you're writing, or do you try and avoid?
No, not while I'm writing. I do, crime is my favourite reading material, but I try to avoid similar type authors to me when I'm writing, because I don't want to be influenced. I want to do my own thing, which generally I don't have a problem with, because I do tend to inhabit the head of whichever character I'm in at the time. If I'm in the killer's head, I'm actually committing that crime. Sounds horrible, almost enjoying the fear of the person in front of me. I think that's why I like writing crime, because it allows me to deal with the dark side of my nature, which I believe we all have.
I think that's probably what draws a lot of people to reading crime, isn't it? That kind of fascination with the dark side of things, and it's a safe way of exploring it.
Exactly. There are certain things in crime that I cannot read, mainly because I'm squeamish about those things. Anybody who is doing anything bad to somebody's eyes, I close the book. That's it. I cannot read. I can't remember which author it was. It might have been Karen Slaughter. I'm sure that anybody listening will know which book I'm talking about. It was years and years ago. The perpetrator was taking women and sewing their eyes shut. I've started reading that. We got to the point where he was actually sewing the eyes shut, and that was it. I could not continue.
Wow. I think everyone has the thing that makes them. I was saying to Gwyn GB, I interviewed her last week, and she had a book that I read in preparation for the interview where she killed people by putting snakes in the car. And I was just like, just no.
No, that's another one. That type of thing, no. And yet I can actually write about somebody doing horrendous things. I mean, really bad things. But those to do with the eyes and any creepy crawly or snakes or anything like that, no. And no animals will ever be hurt in my books, ever.
Yeah, it's important to a lot of people. While we're on the sort of inhabiting the minds of people, Abby Frost asked a question about that. She says, you manage in your books to inhabit a killer's consciousness. What research have you done to help you achieve this?
None whatsoever. I just, as I wish I could actually explain what happens. As I'm writing, I become that person. And I just let my mind go free. And I don't research how to get into the heads of bad people. As I said, I think I must have a very dark little corner of my mind just waiting to come out all the time. And then I let it go.
Because they do read very believably.
Sorry?
They do read very believably. When you read your books, like the sort of sections from the killer's point of view, you do truly.
No, I'm really pleased to hear you say that, because obviously from my perspective, I believe that that's what I'm doing. So it's good to hear from a reader's perspective that it works. I'll be honest, sometimes I do read bits of my book and I think, wow, that was dark. But at the time that I was writing it, that's how it felt. I never ever think, what would he or she do? Never. I just do it. And sometimes I surprise myself with how twisted the people are.
That's great.
My partner says he sleeps with one eye open. He needs to. mug with Love Me Tender cover on one side, and on the back it says, "My partner kills people for a living." And I think, well, yeah, okay.
Tony Millington says evening to us both.
Good evening.
Let's see what other questions we've had. Marion Todd had a few for you. She says she loves your books and she likes the new branding. As you live in a warm country, she wonders if the weather influences your writing at all. Do you like writing scenes where it's cold and wet because you don't get so much of it?
No. No, I've lived in warm countries since I was 23, and I am now decades older than 23. So no, the weather doesn't make any difference. I just go with it.
She also wanted to know if you'd set books where you live.
The crime series, it's a fictional town, but I did for a couple of years live very close to where I've set that fictional town. And I have used places in the various books, such as Stamford, Rutland Water, Leicester, Oakham. That I used to live in for a couple of years in a little village called North Luffenham in Rutland, and the places that I used to go sort of near to there feature in the books from time to time. But the town where the main events take place is a fictional town.
Fair enough. How important do you think settings are for a crime book? What do you think the differences are, say, between having a fictional town and choosing it to set it in a real place?
That's a good question, because the psychological thriller that I've just finished, it's with the publisher at the moment for editing, I actually did set in a real place. And I found it harder because I had to keep going back to the map to make sure that I was in the right place. Where with the crime series, that was my town, I made it up. So it was easier for me to know where things were as I was writing. Where for the psychological thriller, it was annoying because I'd think, oh God, where that person's there, if they're going to get to the next place, how do they have to get there? Google Maps, absolutely brilliant. And what was really great with doing that was using the satellite image so that I could actually see the terrain. And in the book, the main character runs. And what I did, you know the little man that you can do on Google Maps? I actually, if you like, ran that little man along the route so that I would know what it looked like, what she was passing, and when she was on cobblestones, and you know, that type of thing. Whereas in my own books, I decided what the terrain was going to be like. I didn't have to be as accurate, because I'm quite sure somebody living in Stamford, if they pick that book up and start reading it and think, hang on a minute, that road isn't there, it will irritate them.
So I think Leslie's made an interesting point that I was going to ask. Like with your kind of writing tutor advice head on, do you think like readers prefer sort of real places that they visited? Do you think it's better to sort of set stuff somewhere where people might visit, or you can go and do kind of local book signings maybe? Or is it absolutely fine to do kind of made up stuff? Which would you advise would be better?
If I could go back in time, and from when I wrote the very first book, I would probably not have made up a town. But this is more a marketing thing than a reader-writer. It's much easier, as you've just said, to do book signings in a place that exists than one that doesn't. I think really it depends on the person. Non-crime, Sue Moorcroft, who is a prolific and obviously stellar writer, she makes up her places and has maps and what have you. And I'm quite sure that her readers believe in that place. That's the important thing. If you're going to make up a place, you've actually got to know it so well that your readers believe it's a real place.
Going with that kind of made up place idea, what do you think is the importance of a map in a book then?
I don't like them personally, but but I would imagine if, I think it's sort of a personal preference. For me, where I have read books where there are maps, I tend to ignore them because I have the picture in my head of where something is when I'm reading. It's a bit like descriptions of people. I don't like when I'm reading being told that somebody is 6'2", has dark hair, brown eyes, you know, that detail. But I do like to know if he limps or has a scar. You know, I don't need the exact. And for me, a map is, like, for me, is too exact. Because I would be reading and think, oh, let me just go and have a look at the map. And it will take me out of the story. I want to be entirely in the story all the time.
Yeah, I mean, for me, I kind of like them. But I also like books set in places that I visited or know and like, if you know what I mean.
Yeah. Well, as I say, if I had my time all over again, I wouldn't have created a fictional town. I would have chosen somewhere that I knew and maybe put in a few different locations that didn't exist within that town.
Yeah, well, like Peter Robinson kind of is a bit of a hybrid, isn't he? He's got a made-up village where the inspector lives, but it's kind of set in very real place in Yorkshire.
Exactly.
You go to real cities and real things.
Well, in some of my books where the detectives do actually have to go to other cities, those I research and I do actually go on to Google Maps and I look and I make notes and I also do like the online tourist thing to find out, because I want to be accurate, particularly for a place that I've never actually been to.
Fair enough. Tony Millington says he used to live in South Luffenham. His parents still live there.
Really? Oh God, they're not quite side by side, but you know, you've got North Luffenham and South Luffenham.
Yeah, well, small world, isn't it?
Well, North Luffenham features in this book, in Children in Chains, and in the first book, there's a pub that the detectives go to. That's called the Horse and Panniers, and it's entirely based. In fact, it's like I stole it for the Nag and Bag in that first book. So as you go into, sadly, it's not there anymore. I went online to have a look to see what had changed, and it's not there. But the Nag and Bag, the Horse and Panniers in North Luffenham, is actually the pub I used for Retriever of Souls. So you see, I do use real places, but not necessarily where they're supposed to be.
Yeah, makes sense. Abby also wanted to know, who do you go to for expert advice? Do you have people who are police officers or forensic scientists whose brains you can pick? And how important are they? You know, if you're setting out writing crime, how important is a good expert?
They are invaluable. If you have something, I don't know if I've told this story before on this particular book club, and if I have, my apologies. I wanted to kill people using embalming fluid, and the Crime Writers Association had, if you like, an Ask the Expert, where they put you in touch with experts, and they put me in touch with a doctor. And I asked, you know, how would I need to do it? And he came back and he said, look, you can't do it. And he did go into the reasons why you can't kill somebody using embalming fluid. And I thought, oh, but I went on to, we had a lovely sort of email exchange, and he became my Dr. Death, because he said, well, what is it you want, you know, why do you want to have something like this? And I explained to him, and he said, oh, use insulin. And then he explained to me, you know, that insulin is a naturally occurring substance in the body. It won't be picked up on autopsy unless they're specifically looking for it. It's one of the things where more people are murdered using insulin and get away with it than probably anything else. And he told me exactly how to do it and what the results would be. And I used that in the third book in the series. But without that, I wouldn't have known whether or not it worked. You know, the internet is great, but you do need to speak to actual experts. I have a retired police friend who was for many years in the Met, who lives here, and she reads for me and picks up any things that don't quite ring true.
So if you don't know an expert, say, if you're not like friends with a policeman or somewhere like that, where are good places to go and find those?
Join the Crime Writers Association. The only thing is, it's like cart before the horse. You have to be published to join the Crime Writers Association. But there are people who will give you advice. I have actually gone on to various forums to look for answers to things specific to certain medical situations. And it's amazing how people are prepared to give of their time. So if you've got a question, type it into Google, see what comes up. Don't take the Joe Blog said. If you find a forum that is specific to that type of question, join it. Find out who the experts are there and ask them. And you'll be, as I said, people are very generous with their time. Particularly if you tell them that they'll get a mention in the thank you.
We have a helpful people file in our
Right.
that has all the kind of expertise of the members. So if anyone has a question, they can ask.
Now, okay, where will we find that? Is that in one of the tabs at the top?
Yeah, it's in the files section.
Right. So if we go into files, it will be in there.
Mm-hmm. And it lists all the members who are like ex-police officers, forensic experts, people with a good science background. So like Paul Gibson, for instance.
Right.
Bit of an expert in like science.
Well, you've answered the question. And that's where I'll be going from now on.
It's kind of a handy thing, I think.
Very much.
People who come in and ask questions for their books.
Yeah. Well, I'll be going to have a look to see what sort of topics are covered, because that is absolutely brilliant.
How important do you think it is to get your research and kind of procedures and things correct?
I think it's very important. It stands to the credibility of the story. As a reader, you only need one tiny thing that you know is wrong, and it niggles. You know, you then think, oh, well, what else is wrong? And for me, it jars me out of the story. I think it's really important.
I 100% agree. I am.
As to the best of your ability, look, certain things will slip through because you don't know that it's something that needs to be dealt with. But in the main, as much as you possibly can, do your research and get advice.
Yeah, I think you've got to go for a middle ground, haven't you? You've got to get it mostly right. And I think most people, even if they're more of an expert in it than sort of the book is about, will go with it even if there's a odd mistake that's a bit advanced.
Yes.
You know, most people will let that slide. But I know, I've read books and they've made the most obvious errors for things like DNA that I feel like my kids that I teach would know.
Right.
And that's just me, then I can't read anymore.
Okay, you're asking about sort of research. I can't tell you what it is, but there's well, if you've read it, you will know. There's something in the first book where the scientific research was essential. And I ended up with pages and pages and pages of this thing that my pathologist had to sum up in 3 sentences. And that was hard, because I had to get across to the reader the science behind it without using pages and pages and pages of research. Because that's the other thing. Advice for aspiring, this is my advice for aspiring crime writers. Wear your research lightly. You have to know everything. Your readers don't. Your readers only need to know what is essential. But for you to get across that essential point, you've got to know, it's like, if the, sorry, I'm trying to get on the camera. If the research is that big, all your reader needs to know is that much. Just that little sliver in there. But you've got to take that research and bring it down to its bare bones in a way that the reader will go, oh, wow, yes, got it. And just accept that what you've said is right. But you've got to know everything. The reader doesn't.
I'm sure I heard an author being interviewed recently, it must have been with Sam, and they said that they do all their research before they start writing and then leave it for a while, because by then they've sort of, when they start writing, they know just enough to... Yes,
that's a very good point. No, that is a very good point. But yeah, that would be my advice. Wear your research mantle lightly.
That's very good advice. Tony Millington's still on the pubs of North and South Luffenham.
What did he have to say?
He says he knows the Horse and Panniers, and he knows all the pubs in North and South Luffenham. I don't know what that means. Maybe he's on a tour.
There were, I seem to look, it was a long time ago. There were only 2 in North. He'll probably come back now and say, no, there were more. There were only 2 that I knew of in North Luffenham. Funnily enough, one was very close to where I lived, and the Horse and Panniers was at the other end of the village, but we preferred that one.
I was just wondering if there was like an epic kind of North and South Loppenham pub crawl, you know.
Well, if there was, I missed out on it. I didn't know about it.
I don't know if there are these in Leeds, where I live. There is a very famous pub crawl called the Otley Run.
Oh, okay.
That goes down the Otley Road, and you start in Headingley, which is quite well known, isn't it? It's like home of cricket and things like that. There are questions about where you start in Headingley, but you start in Headingley and you work your way down all the pubs to town.
Right.
Which is quite a lot. It's like a student kind of staple, but it's like famed.
I hope it's a walking pub crawl.
Oh, yeah, 100% a walking pub crawl.
or crawling towards the end, I would think.
Definitely crawling towards the end, I think. Yeah, but it's like one of those, you know, like famed.
Well, you have to ask him. Has he done a sort of local pub crawl?
Yeah, Tony. He's still watching. He said he thinks it was Peter James who said about the research. Might have been, actually. Yeah.
Quite possibly. Yeah.
Because he has some good. Because he's sort of very well known, isn't he, for his relationship with Graham, his police expert. And I think he was saying that, like, he goes, you know, they've spent a lot of time together talking about things. Jane says she totally agrees. Too much info is off-putting, but writers need to know the ins and outs of things, but don't need to share it and bore their reader.
Well, that is the same. That's the same with backstory. You have to know pretty much everything about your character from the moment they were born until they've appeared in the book. You've got to know how they would react in any given situation and what's happened to make them be the kind of person they are, but you can't put that in the book. But that has to come out through the way they act. So it's research, backstory. You've got to know everything, but you can't use it.
How important is it to keep, especially if you're writing series, to keep notes about your characters?
Very important. Very. Yeah, I do have jotted. I'm not very good at keeping tidy notes, but I do have pieces of paper that tell me all about my main characters, but only not like backstory, but like their dates of birth, what they look like, who they're married to, you know, things that I could easily slip up on if I don't check the notes.
Fair enough. It's one of my questions that I like to ask people about keeping notes about the characters, because I always think it's really interesting.
Before I start, I do make profile pages of the main characters. And then, as I say, these others just turn up already fully formed. And I think, why did I bother making all these notes about the others when this one's just turned up and is perfect?
So what kind of, if you're reading, you know, if you're putting your like judging head on about like writing, what kind of things make a really good piece of like crime writing to you?
Something that grabs me immediately, takes me down blind alleys and makes me think that I know what's going on, and then shows me that I know nothing because I should actually have gone down this alley instead. I like to be fooled. I like to think I know what's going on and then discover that I don't. One of the books that absolutely blew me away, and I am going to be negative about the ending, so I'm sorry. I apologise in advance. when I started reading Gone Girl, I was, oh my God, so hooked on that narrative. And then when the whole thing switched around, I said to my husband, who was alive at the time, this is a book. This is the first book I've ever read that I wish I had written. I was so impressed with it. And then the second part of the book, really good. The ending, I was so angry with the ending because for me, if you believe everything that's gone before, that ending wasn't credible. But that's a personal opinion. But the writing, right up until that little bit at the end, was brilliant because I was hooked, I was hoodwinked, I was taken down paths that I didn't want to go, only to find that I shouldn't have gone down there in the first place. It really, really, really good writing until the end.
So what kind of crime do you like to read? Have you got any like good recent recommendations for us?
I just finished reading The Babysitter by Phoebe Morgan, and that I really enjoyed that. What else have I read just recently? I've actually just started getting into Tana French's books. I can't believe that I've only just discovered her, and that was thanks to your site. It was a recommendation. I thought, okay, well, I'll give that a go.
Dangerous place, our book group.
The thing is, I read mainly on Kindle, and I'm actually terrified to look at how many books I've bought that I've forgotten that I've bought because I've only got a limited amount of reading time. So I've probably got some real beauty on there that I haven't read. I like psychological thrillers. I like police procedurals. Actually, I just like reading crime. And I like cozy crime as well. I'm quite happy to read cozy crime. It doesn't have to be dark and disturbing.
See, I'll read most types of crime, but by choice, probably cozy crime, and then like, you know what the best description is, like urban fantasy, things like the Dresden Files, Rivers of London.
See, I also like reading. I think it's I don't know what we're supposed to call it these days, but what used to be called chick lit. I like to read that because my own writing is very, very dark. So it's nice to read something lighter with a good plot. As long as it's got a good plot and believable character. In fact, pretty much anything. As long as it's got a good plot and believable characters, yeah, I'll read it.
Yeah, I'll agree with you. My characters are really important to me. I like to sort of buy into the characters and them to be really well fleshed out, like real people.
They have to be. They have to be. If you are aware that you're reading, then the book hasn't actually grabbed you. I like to get to the end of a book and think, I didn't want that to end. I didn't want that to end. Why aren't there more chapters? And also to wonder about what happened to the characters afterwards. And by that, I don't mean that the ends haven't been tied up, but how those people go forward in their lives.
Yeah, or even that you invest so much in the characters, like even the subsidiary ones that you sort of like. One of my other favourite author chat interview questions is, would you write a spin-off series?
No.
A spin-off novella or a spin-off short story about some of the characters in like a series book?
No, I don't think I would. But that is mainly because I have so many ideas for new series. I'm plotting at the moment one that you will probably like because it's at the cozier end of crime. And it's going to be a journalist who leaves her, for various reasons, leaves her job in the UK, storms off to Spain to stay in a friend's villa because she just needs some off time. And while and this is going to be written here, where I live, so it will be in a real place. I live on what is sometimes called the Costa del Crime. I believe, I don't know, but I will do the research. We have a number of people who, let's say, the police in the UK would really like to have a chat with, living along our coast. And my journalist is going to stumble into one of those. And the story will take off from there. But no real graphic descriptions of any violence.
Well, we've got you here. So you write quite gritty novels, and you're not afraid of going into quite dark subjects. How far should you go into those kind of things? Like, how far is too far, if that makes sense? Or how much is too much, if you go into those kind of subjects?
Okay, I will only put so much on the page and then leave the rest to the reader's imagination. I won't go into. Okay, for me, if there is a line, and beyond that line, it's gratuitous. So I like to put in enough so that my readers can take over in their own minds. I won't go into the gory, nitty gritty of what happens, because I'm actually too busy seeing it from the killer's or the weirdo's perspective. I am doing it, and because I am doing it, I'm not going to be thinking, okay, I'm going to take that piece there and put it there, and paint the wall with I won't explain it, because my character is actually doing it. I don't think I got that across very well. So I don't know how else to explain it.
No, it's an interesting question, because I think some people do like the dark and gritty end. I don't know if you've ever read one of our author members, Cheryl Elaine.
No.
It's probably like the darkest kind of books I've read. And I think she toes the line of too far. I've said this to her, so this is okay. Like I'm saying this online, if you know what I mean. Like, I've met her in person and we've had this discussion, but she toes that line of just okay, if you know what I mean.
Right.
And she does it well. Like, they're well written and they're very interesting books, but it's like you're reading them going like,
it's a bit too much for you.
Yeah.
But there are a lot of readers that absolutely love that. When I mentioned earlier, my husband died some years ago, but he was a very critical reader, and so is my daughter, and neither of them hold back, or obviously Derek doesn't anymore, and he would read my books and say, oh, it is too much. Michelle would read them and say, it's not enough. And if I got that, I knew that I was where I wanted to be, because I didn't want to be too much, but I also didn't want my readers to feel it's not enough. And I think where I am, my readership, that's what they like. There's a lot of detail, but it's not gratuitous. It's only enough to plant ideas in their minds so that they can then take over and see it for themselves.
So then we're on to kind of the other important question of how important is it to have those critical early readers, like beta readers, but very trusted ones?
It's essential, I think. It's essential. I mentioned to you that my first psychological standalone is with the editor at the moment, the publisher for editing. I gave that to my daughter to read and got brilliant feedback from her that required me to change certain things. I then sent it to another friend who, again, always gives really good feedback. And she picked up other things that weren't important to Michelle, but that helped me. So then I rewrote it again, and it was that version with 2 lots of good critical feedback that went to the editor. And I'm waiting for the edits to come back. And obviously there will be a lot more to do, because there's always a lot more to do.
What's a perfect amount of kind of like a beta readership group then?
I think probably a maximum of 3. I only use 2 because I think if you have too many, everybody sees something different and you can't please everybody. So you need 2 or 3 that you trust, that love your writing, but aren't afraid to say this doesn't work and tell you why it doesn't work.
Yeah, I beta read for 1 person, and I've got to say you've got to be honest, I think.
There's no point otherwise. There's no point. One of the things with new writers, some new writers, is when they are giving something out to be read, what they're actually saying is, please tell me it's okay, because I'm new, and I want you to tell me it's great. And you've got to find a way of, yes, telling them it's great, because if anybody who's reached the end of a manuscript and has written a book, it is great. But you've got to be able to tell them what needs doing to actually turn it from a great first draft into something that could one day be published. And it's tricky. And for me, as I said, I have these 2 readers who I trust absolutely to be honest with me and tell me what doesn't work.
Makes sense. Very good advice.
I hope so.
No, I think it is. It really is. And it must be so hard to couch kind of constructive criticism to people, especially sort of anyone that you were like tutoring, I'd imagine, like writing. I'm thinking about what it's like for me as a teacher when I'm telling people about their work, and you've got to like phrase it in like such a way that it's kind of.
I've got a number of clients that I'm mentoring, and I think sometimes I look at the manuscript that I'm sending back to them, and it's full of yellow highlights and red comments and that, and then I think they're all things that they need to know, but then I make sure that I tell them what is good about the manuscript. You can't just be negative, because then you'll destroy somebody's confidence. And the whole point of being a good mentor is to say, this is what's really good about your work. If you do look at these areas, it will be even better. And if you keep going, yes, it could get to publishable stage, because that's what we're all aiming for.
See, again, really good advice. We've got 2 minutes left, or not even 2 minutes left, got about a minute left. Do you want to just give everyone a reminder of like you and your books?
I've been talking about them all the way through. They're probably bored to tears by now. Okay.
Get a bit more advertising in. It's fine.
My main detective is D.I. Sterling, and he is a decent man doing his best, and usually getting it right. Like most detectives these days, he's got a horrific personal life, and the crimes are dark. For example, in this one, it's a serial killer. This one, it's people trafficking. This one, 6 murders by insulin injection. This one, oh, this is one of my favourites. This is a vigilante who is torturing men who are rapists. I like the idea that they're all men victims in that one. And this one is about a man who just wants to be loved and to love somebody, but he goes about it in a very weird way. As it says here, if he wants you, there's no escape. Ta-da!
Excellent. And we're going to finish off with the words from Tony Millington, who says, thank you for a great interview and advice.
Ah, thank you. I really enjoyed it. Thank you for having me on.
No worries. Thanks for joining us.
No, it's been an absolute pleasure.